So for this video, you're going to need the following software installed. You're going to need Visual Studio Code. So go to code.visualstudio.com and download Visual Studio Code for your OS. You're going to need Node. So go to nodejs.org and download Node. You're going to need version 14 or greater. And you're going to need Postgres. So go to postgres-sql.org and download and install Postgres for your relevant OS. Okay, at some point you're probably going to want to add login functionality to your website. Now, the kind of preferred way to do this nowadays, if you just want to add a standard email password or username password login, is to use something called JSON Web tokens, or JWTs. Now, there's a really good article by Hasura. So if you go to this website here, this has a very in-depth article all about JSON Web tokens, why you should hold the first access token in memory, but then have a refresh token that you hold in a cookie, but it's a special type of cookie, a HTTP only cookie. And to do the sort of TLDR summation of this, the modern way of doing logins is to use JSON Web tokens. You should send 2 JSON Web tokens back to the client, an access token which is going to be fairly short-lived, maybe 15 minutes, and a refresh token which can be a few days. Gives quite a good user experience because you don't have to keep asking the user for their email and password every time they try and get into your site. It will remember the login for a few days. So it's a good user experience, but of course there's a little bit of a security concern there, so you have to be a bit careful. And so that's why we're using these HTTP only cookies to hold that refresh token, because they cannot be accessed by client-side JavaScript, so they're secure. That's about it, really. I don't want to get too involved. This is a whole massive article on this here. But I'm just going to go through actually how you implement this process from scratch using Node and Express. And let me just show you the finished API working. So don't really consider this as a final login screen. This is just to show you how you would access the authentication API from your front end. Obviously, there's a million and one ways you could create a front end. You could use React, Vue, Svelte, Angular. I've just done a very basic vanilla JavaScript example code, really. So it should give you pretty well everything you need to implement this in whatever front end you want to do. So let's see this working. So I know that I have a user that has an email of bob@email.com with a password of Bob. And I can hit login, and we've logged in successfully. It's actually taking this data from our JSON Web token. So we're passing back in our JSON Web token our user ID and our email and our username. And so one thing to understand about JSON Web tokens is that they're totally readable on the client side. So don't think that a JSON Web token is secure in that you can't read them, but their kind of superpower is that you can't change them. Or at least if you do change them and you send them to the server is going to know that you've changed that JSON Web token. So you can't mess with this ID and pretend that a different ID has a valid JSON Web token. That just won't work. So this access token, which is one of the JSON Web tokens we send back, is in memory. So as soon as we do a refresh, we are logged out. And so that's not a great user experience, but that is why we have our refresh token. So we can hit this refresh token button, and this will log us back in without Bob having to put his email and password back in again. And of course, you could do this automatically. I've stuck it on a button, but the idea, if you go back to the Hasura website and scroll down a little bit, this is the flow that they're suggesting. So when you have a new session, you're going to try and silently do a refresh. So you would essentially do the code that's underneath this refresh token button, and if it fails, then the user will have to log in, but otherwise it's all good. So Bob is logged in, so he can get users. But I have got my access token set to a very short time, just like 40 seconds. So as you saw there, we tried to get users, but our JSON Web token, our access token, had expired. So we're going to have to click on refresh again, and then we should have 40 seconds to be able to get our users. There you go. And if I waited 40 seconds, which I can't be bothered to do, but you know, eventually this will run out. Our refresh token is in that HTTP only cookie. So the good thing about that is we can, if I right click here, I can clone the tab. So this is a different tab from this one, and I can still click refresh and it will log me in. So that's a good user experience and works quite nicely. Now we also have this delete token button here, because this refresh token, you could have it set to like 2 weeks or something like that. But you might want to give the ability for the user to log out. And so what you can do is actually delete the HTTP only cookie, and that will essentially log the user out. So if we do that, then our refresh token won't work anymore, and obviously our get users won't work anymore, and we will have to log back in again. And we could actually log in now as a different user. So I've got Fred in here, and he can log in with a password of Fred, log in, and now we're logged in as Fred. And again, Fred has the ability to get all users, which is probably in reality not what you want to do, but for this example, let's say that's fine. And that is kind of the basics of an authentication system based around the principles outlined in this Hasura post. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is open Visual Studio Code. I'm going to presume you've got Node and Visual Studio Code installed. So all I've done here is gone File, Open Folder, and I've just created myself a JWT tutorial folder. Select folder, blank folder, we're all good to go. So if we open up our terminal, and let me just show you that I'm using Node version 14.16. You're going to want a fairly up-to-date version of Node. Version 14 or greater should be fine, because I'm going to be using ES modules. So the first thing we want to do is initialize our app by doing npm init-y. That will create us a package.json file. I'm just going to keep the name JWT tutorial, it's fine. And I'm going to install a whole raft of dependencies here. So npm install, and we want bcrypt, cookie parser, cause, .env, express of course, JSON Web token, and Postgres. So let's hit enter and go away and make a cup of tea and come back. And then we actually want a dev dependency of nodemon, which will just mean we don't have to keep stopping and starting our Express server. That'll do it for us. We've got our dev dependency here of nodemon. We should have all these in our dependencies. And let's just do our scripts while we're in here. So we want a dev script where we run nodemon like so. And that will actually run this index.js because that's set to our main. And we want a start script, so when we deploy, we don't want to use nodemon, we actually want to use node, of course. So there you go, there's our two scripts. Now we are using ES modules in Node, so we need to specify type here, and not common JS, we want module. So Control S to save, and I think we're good. Okay, let's now work on our index.js. So new file, index.js. So the first thing we want to do is import Express. And we're going to be sending back JSON, so we want to import JSON as well. And that's all from Express. We want to import cause, just so we don't have any cause issues. So import cause. We want to import .env because we want to set up some environmental variables, and .env will help us do that on our dev server. We'll have to do it manually on our deployment server, or actually you can actually upload a .env file to your deployment server, but I just tend to do them manually. And then cookie parser, because we are using cookies. And then we don't get an __ dr name for when we're using ES modules in Node, so we need a little bit of help from path. So we need dr name and join from path. And you'll see why in a sec. And then we need file URL to path from URL. Okay, so that's our imports done for the moment, and the first thing you should do is call .env.config. And what that will do is look for a .env file and pull in any environmental variables from that file. So that needs to be done early on. The second thing we should do is, like I say, unfortunately, __ dr name when you're using ES modules, for some reason you have to create this yourself. So we can do that with file URL to path, and then we can get that from import.meta.url. Why do we need that? Well, we're going to be serving up some static files, and we need to specify where those static files are. And you can't presume, I guess, that you're going to be running this application in the same folder as the sort of base folder of where you might be serving up your static files. So if you go to the Express documentation, it actually explains it better than I did, sorry about that, here. So this is why we need this __ dr name. I think in most cases you can probably get away with just doing that, but I think this is just being super safe. So let's create our Express application. So app is equal to Express. Let's get our port. So if you're deploying to somewhere like Heroku, that'll actually give you the port in an environmental variable called port. But if that is not set, then we'll just specify our own port, i.e. if we're on the dev server, we'll specify a port of 5000. Cause wise, well, so to make sure that our HTTP only cookies get sent to our browser, we seem to need to have to specify credentials equal to true. And I'm going to give the ability to specify the URL for our origin. But if you don't specify the URL for our origin, I'm just going to say that essentially anything can access our API. Now I want to use those cause options, so app.use cause and send in cause options. We also want to handle JSON, so we send in the JSON middleware there, and we also want to be able to handle cookies, so we pass in the cookie parser middleware as well. So that's all our middleware taken care of. Now we want to serve up that static kind of example login page that I showed you. So let's do that. And this is the line that I just showed you in the Express documentation. So that is essentially saying that we're going to put static files in a folder called public. Okay, so we have to start listening now. So if we do app.listen, we need to specify our port, and we can say something like using a backtick there, server is listening on port. Okay, so let's save that, and what we want to do now is create ourselves a public folder, new folder, public, and we'll just stick in a index.html file in here, and let's just use emit html:5, hit enter to scaffold that out for us. I'm just going to give it a title of JWT tutorial, and let's do a header that says the same, like so. And now if we do npm run dev, and go to localhost 5000, refresh, let's kill that one. Yeah, there you go. So we're serving up our static HTML page using Express. So that's not super exciting, but let's move on to our database. So if we right click in here, do new file, and I'm going to create a database.sql file, and here I'm just going to type in the SQL that we need to create our database. So create database, I'm going to call this JWT tutorial, like so, and then we want to create a table to hold all our users in. So create table users, and we want a user ID, and I want to use this UUID, which is like a nice unique ID, and we can create that unique ID by using UUID underscore generate and this underscore v4 method, but we do need to use an extension so that we can use that method. So we do create extension, but only if it doesn't exist, and this extension is called UUID-OSSP. So that's our user ID taken care of. We don't have to worry about that anymore, that'll be automatic. And we just want to make sure that our usernames are never null, so text not null. Let's do a user email, again text not null, and a user password, again text not null. And I'm just going to put some handy bits of SQL in here just in case you're not that familiar with SQL. So that would list all our users, select all from users. You can insert into the users table by doing insert into users, then in brackets you have to specify the fields you want to insert. So say we want to put in a user name, email and password, we have to specify those, and then we specify the values we want to put in. So say we want to put Bob into username, let's say bob@email.com into user underscore email, and password Bob, like so. Of course, we'd never hold an actual user password explicitly like this. We're going to be using bcrypt, but just to show you how you can use insert. Right, and we can put comments into this file by double dashes, and I just want to show that we can log into our Postgres database by doing psql-u Postgres, and this is actually our username, and then it will ask you for your password, and we can connect to a specific database by doing \c, and what's our database name? It's JWT tutorial, so that would connect to our JWT tutorial database. What's another handy one? Listing our tables, so that would be \dt, like so. And if you want to do this all on Heroku, you can do that command, and that will connect you to Heroku. And actually Heroku gives you a database automatically, so you never have to do the create database on Heroku, but you will need to do the create table. Okay, so let's create this database now in Postgres. So if we open another terminal and we do psql-u Postgres, and you will need to type in the username that you're using for your local Postgres database, and you will need to type in your password here. Mine's just Postgres because I don't care. Now we're in the Postgres console, so we can essentially create our database now. So if I copy this line here, copy, come down here, paste that in, right click, and then hit enter. And if it says create database there, then it means it's done that. So now we want to connect to our database, so we do this line here, copy, right click. So now we are connected to our JWT tutorial database, and now we want to create this table. So let's select that, copy, right click, enter. And that's because I have not done this line up here. So like I say, we need this extension if we want to use this UUID. So let's copy, paste that in here, and we've created that extension, so we should be able to do this now. Yeah, create table means that it's created that table, and we can double check with a \dt, and there you see that we have a users table. Let's insert a dummy user, so we can copy like so, hit enter, and that means that it's inserted one row. You should be able to now do /dt, and that will say we've got one row in the users table, and we can actually do this line here, copy, paste, and as you can see, we have one user in our Postgres database. And this is this UUID I was talking about, quite a nice unique ID there. Okay, I'm going to Control-C and quit out of there. I'm pretty well done with our database now. So let's start accessing this database in our code. So if we right click and do new file, and we're going to call this db.js. So we need to import pg from pg. We need to pull out pool, actually capital P, pool, from pg, and let me just set up the local pool config, which you've pretty well seen that our local database has the following settings. We have a username of Postgres, a password of Postgres, we're on localhost, the default port that Postgres uses is 5432, and our database name was JWT tutorial, I think. Okay, so that's our local database, but we only want to use that if we're in dev mode. So this will check for an environmental variable called database_URL, and if it exists, then we're going to say that our connection string is equal to it, but we want to set SSL reject unauthorized equal to false. Otherwise, we are going to use our local pool config. Let's just format all that a little bit nicer. So let's put that there, like that, so it's a bit easier to read. And then we create a new pool using that pool config, and we want to export our pool. So that's all the sort of boilerplate stuff that we need to connect to our Postgres database, dependent on whether it's our local Postgres database here or the one on, say, Heroku, which will be this one here. So that's that done. We can close that, save that, close that. So let's do something simple just to test access to our database. So if we create a new folder, and we'll call this folder routes, and in this folder let's create a new file, and we're going to call this users-routes.js. So we need to import express from express, and we want to import our Postgres pull from our db.js, and let's create ourselves a router from express.router. And then how this works is we do router.get, and we're saying this is going to handle the root of users, and we want an async arrow function, and let's put this inside a try catch, and we're going to say users is equal to await, and then we do pull.query, and then we send it an SQL query. Simple as that. So select all from users, and then we want to pass this back as JSON, and I'm going to have a object that has a property of users where I'm going to pass back all our rows. And if there's any errors, we can send back a status code of 500, but I also want to send back some JSON with an error property of error.message, like so. And at the bottom here, I need to export our router. Okay, so that's about the simplest router you've probably ever seen, which is good. And how do we use that router? Well, we come back into index.js, and at the top here we have to import it, obviously. So we do import users router from routes users-routes.js. So that's imported the router, and then we can, probably most sensible to do it after here, we can do app.use, and then we kind of attach that router to an endpoint. So we sort of say API/users is going to use users router. So we would have to hit API users to hit this users router, and then this kind of gets tagged on the end, so we could kind of extend the route by adding more here, but this is handling the root of the router, which is here, and it should hopefully pass back our users. Let's save that. Let's make sure that's saved and see if that works. Yeah, the first time, which hardly ever happens. So that's great. So we've got our JSON. Like I say, we're passing back a JSON object, and it's got a property of users, and an array of all our users, and we've only got the one at the moment. Yeah, for giggles, let's stick another one in. So how would we do that? Well, we can just come back here, database.sql, and let's add in Fred. So let's copy that, and I guess I should have kept our connection to our database open, but never mind. Let's go in here, connect to our JWT tutorial database. Tutorial. There you go. Too many T's. There you go. And then we just paste in that. We now have Fred in there. Let's come back here, do a refresh, and now we can see we've got Fred in there as well. So that's definitely working, which is good. So we're hitting our database on this particular endpoint here, specified by our route. But we really want to be able to create users and not do it where we're sticking the password in like this. We need to encrypt these passwords. So let's do that next. So if we come back to users routes, let's import bcrypt from bcrypt. And so if we come down underneath here, and let's do router, but if we're adding stuff, we need to do a post request now. And we'll still use the route there. And we still need an asynchronous arrow function. And we will use a try catch as well. And so what we want to do is we want to create a hashed password. And so we can use bcrypt to do this. It has a handy method called hash. And we just pull the password out of the body of the post request, and we can specify 10 rounds, which should give us a nicely hashed password. So I guess you might be asking what a hashed password is. And it's considered to be the way you should be holding passwords in a database. You should presume that someone is going to hack your website and get access to your database. And that's kind of worst case scenario, but if that happens, then they shouldn't be able to get into your users table and see all your users' passwords. And so what you do is you never store the users' passwords, you store a hashed version of their password. And hashing a password is like a one-way trip. You hash that password and it's pretty well impossible to go from a hashed password back to the original password. When a user is trying to log in, you can compare that hashed password to their password and you can see if their password is correct compared to that to their hashed password. And bcrypt does all the hard work for you. You should do things like salt the password, It's all a little bit involved, but so I won't go into it really, but I can put some links in the descriptions if you're interested. But basically, bcrypt looks after all that for you, and all you need to do is bcrypt.hash the password, and you've got a nice secure password in your database, which really is even more secure than what you'd find in WordPress. I don't think WordPress even salts their passwords, so they're not that secure. So this is a super secure method of holding passwords. Right, so we want to create a new user. So we do await pull.query. We want to do insert into users user underscore name, user underscore email, user underscore password, values, and do $1, $2, $3, returning everything, and what does that $1, $2, $3 mean? Well, $1 is the first one in this array, which is body.name. The second one, which is body.email. And the third one, which is our hashed password that we just created. Just reformat it a bit so it's a little bit clearer. So what's going on here? Well, if you remember rightly, when we inserted, we had these values here that we inserted. Bob goes in here, his email goes in here, password goes in here. So if we come back to this, this goes in here, which then goes in here. This goes in here, which then would go in here, and this goes in $3, which goes in here. So that's how that works. So basically these values get pushed into this, this, and this. And the returning just means that once the insert's done, we're actually going to get that record back, which is kind of nice. And so for the moment, what we'll actually do is pass back that created record. So we can do res.json. So we'll just pass back an object with a property of users, and we want that new user dot rows, and there should be just one, so that'll be that 0. And if we get an error, we want to do exactly the same as we're doing up here. So let's just copy that. Okay, so we need to do a post request. And I could use something like Postman to do the post request, but there's actually quite a neat little extension. If you go into your extensions, this box here, and search for REST, and there's an extension called REST Client. So if you install this extension, then what you can do is you can create a new file, and let's call it requests.rest, like so. And you can do post http:// local host 5000. We're hitting the users API, we need to specify a content type of application/JSON. You need to put a space in here, and then we can specify the body that we want to pass. And let's specify a name of Bob, an email of bob@email.com, and a password of Bob. Now, before we send that request, because I think that would fail, let me just double check. We haven't specified unique under username or email, but I would say we probably want our emails to be unique, so let's just put that in there like so. So we can actually drop our original table or delete our table by doing drop table users like so. You just put a semicolon on the end. If you forget, just put a semicolon, then hit enter, and that works. So we shouldn't have any tables now. And then if I copy that, copy, paste, we've created our table now. And this time we have the specification that all our emails need to be unique, which is definitely safer. So now if we go to our requests.rest and we do a send request, we now, as you can see, it's passing back, because we told it to pass back here, our new user that it's just added, Bob at email, and as you can see, we know his user password was Bob, but it's definitely not saving Bob, it's saving a hashed version. Okay, so let's close all this now, and let's work on our authentication. So let's right click our routes folder and do a new file, and we're going to call this auth-routes.js. And in fact we probably need all these imports that we need for users, so let's just copy those, come in here and paste those in. But we also want to handle JSON Web tokens in here, so we need to import our JSON Web token module, and we're also going to import a little helper that I'm going to create called JWT tokens, and let's put that in utils JWT-helpers.js. Let's comment that out for the moment though, and let's just create our router. And let's down here just export default router, so we don't forget to do that. And what do we want to do? We want to handle our login. So let's do router.post, and that's going to be at the login endpoint. And again, a good old try catch. To log in, we're going to have to specify an email and a password. So we are going to pass those through in our body. So we can pull them out of our body like so. And then we want to look up in our database and see if there is a user that has that specified email. So we can do a select all from users where user underscore email is equal to $1 and we send in our email. Simple as that. So if our users dot rows dot length is equal to 0, then that means we didn't find a user with that particular email address in our database. So we'll send back a 401 and pass back a JSON object that says error, and inside error we'll just say email is incorrect. So let's save that. Let's hook this up so we can test it early. So if we go back to index.js and we can go up here, let's copy that line, but this is the auth router, importing from auth-routes, and come down here and we'll put this under API auth, and this is our auth router. So again, how it works is we would hit API auth, and then we look in here and we're going to add login on the end, so it's API auth login to get to this route here. So let's set up the login request here. So we need to put in hashes to start another post request, and this time this is like that, but it is auth/login. But we just need to send it email and the correct password. But so far we've only done when the email is incorrect. So let's just test that. So if I just type in Bob1, let's do a send request. And there you go, we've got an error, email is incorrect. So this case is working great now. So now we need to do the password check. So if we've got to here, we know we found the email. So now we need to check for a valid password. So we do await bcrypt.compare, and we pass in the password that we're sending to the login API, and we're comparing that to the hashed password that we're holding for that user, Bob in this case. So this will compare, bcrypt will compare the password we're sending in, which is Bob, to the hashed version of Bob that we're holding. And if the two compare correctly, then valid password is set to true, otherwise false. So I can do if not a valid password, then we want to return a status of 401, and you can say error incorrect password. And what we'll actually do, if for the moment, just for test purposes, if we get beyond that, then we'll return a status of 200, and let's say we can just do success, not valid JSON, but that should work. So if we come back to here, this should still say email is incorrect. If we put a correct email in and send that, we get our success back. If we put in the wrong password, then we get incorrect password. So perfect. We are doing pretty well here. Okay, so we don't want to pass success back here. We want to send back a JSON Web token. And to get any further, I want to create this helper. So let's do that now. Let's create a new folder, call it utils, and inside utils I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this JWT-helpers.js, and we want to import JWT from JSON Web token, and I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call it JWT tokens. And really this is just to sort of standardize our tokens that we're sending back, because JSON Web tokens have a payload that you send back with them that has a little bit of data in. And so it's quite nice to sort of specify in one place what that payload would look like. So I am going to include in my payload the user ID, the username, and the user email. Just super handy information to have on tap in that token. Okay, so we are going to create a user that has all these in. Like so. And from that user, we are going to create two tokens, which I'm sure I've mentioned, that we have an access token and a refresh token. So we have our short-lived access token, and what we do is we sign the token, and we sign it with a token secret. So we pass in user, and then we say process.env.access token secret, which I will create in a second. And then what you can do is you can specify when this token will expire. So I can say expires in, and I am going to say 20 seconds, so very short-lived. In reality, you probably want it to be, well, it's up to you, but 15 minutes, something like that, I think is fairly standard. And let's copy that line and let's create a refresh token, and we're going to use the refresh token secret, and we're going to say this expires in, say, 5 minutes. And again, in real life, this is just for test purposes, but in real life this would be probably more like 14 days, something like that. And then we can return an object that has both of these tokens in. And then down here we want to export it. Well, we want to export JWT tokens, so like that. So before we forget, we want to create these two environmental variables, and then you must remember that if you deploy to somewhere like Heroku or whatever server you want to deploy to, you will need to set these up as environmental variables on the server you're deploying to. Now, we haven't got a .env file, so new file .env. Take that, copy, paste, take that, copy, paste. And you want these to be a big long string, essentially, which you never ever ever tell anyone about. You definitely want it more random than that. You can use various methods for creating these secrets, and I'll probably put some links in the description. Like I say, these do need to be secrets. It's kind of written in the name, yeah? So do not share them. So you do not want this .env going to Git. So, you know, new file .git ignore and .env, yeah? Do not push this up to GitHub, else that's just defeating the object, yeah? And actually, node modules, there you go, it's a pretty good git ignore there. Right, so let's save that. And because we're using .env config, these will get copied to local environment variables, so that this line here will return this here. So that's how that works. So we have our little helper here, which means that we can come back here and do the rest of this. So we can do let tokens is equal to the function we've just created, JWT tokens, and we need to pass it in the user that we've just looked up, like so. So that will have passed us back our access token and refresh token for this specific user, and so we can just do res JSON tokens, and those are the two tokens that we will pass back on a successful login. If you remember rightly, we want one of those tokens, the refresh token, to be in a cookie. So we can do res.cookie refresh token and pull out our refresh token out of our tokens like so. And now we want to specify that this is a special HTTP only cookie. So set that to true and that should do the trick. Let's do our error handling here. So res.status 401 JSON error and pass it the message that's in the error. Okay, let's see if that works. So we come back to our requests. Again, we've got an incorrect password here, but if we do a correct password, this is what we get. So we now have a cookie, which is our refresh token. It's HTTP only cookie, so that's good. And we also have our access token and our refresh token. Okay, so at this point you might be thinking to yourself, oh, that's great, so I've got this access token that's getting sent back to me when I log in, but you know, what do I do with it? You know, what use is it to me? And that's exactly what we're going to sort out now. So for subsequent requests where you need to be authenticated, we are going to send along with the request this access token. Now there's a standardized way of doing this, and say if we look at, say, the Twitter API, they use the authorization header, and basically in the authorization header all you do is say bearer, then space, and then your token. And that's a pretty standardized way of doing things, and so we're going to do exactly the same thing. So again, we need a function to do this, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to use Express's middleware solution, and we can kind of stick this authentication middleware into certain routes that need to be authenticated. So this will make sense when we actually do it, so let's do it. Okay, right click, new folder, and we're going to call this middleware. And if we right click in that folder, new file, and we'll call this authorization.js. And in fact, let's close this like so. And we want to import JWT from JSON Web token, and then we want a function that we're going to call authenticate token. And this will take a request, a response, and a next, like so. Okay, so we said that we were going to send the token in the authorization header. So let's read the authorization header, and so we can do that with request.headers, and we're looking for authorization. and we know that this is going to be bearer space token, like so. But we just want the token out of there, so let's pull that out. So we can do auth header and auth header dot split. We're splitting on the space, and we're taking the second one in the array. So what that does is we double check that auth header is not null, so that that we do have a authorization header, and if that's the case, then we're going to split it on the space. So it's going to put bearer in the first index of the array and token in the second index of the array. So bearer is going to be at 0, token is going to be at 1. We want the token, so we do 1 here, and that will give us back our token. Okay. Now, if that doesn't work for some reason, then we're going to return .401 and we're going to pass back an object with an error property that says null token. But if that does work, then we want to verify the token. So we do use the JSON Web tokens verify method, and we do token, and we verify the token against the access token secret. So this is verifying that this token was created using our secret that obviously no one knows, and also checks, if someone's gone in and changed this token, then it will fail the verification. And we need to pass in a callback, and if there is an error, i.e. didn't get verified, then we're going to pass back a 403, and we're going to say whatever the error was, like so. Otherwise, we are actually going to get our payload. It says user here, but the user information is in our payload. So this is the payload from the token. We're going to stuff that in a user property on our request. And then the way that the middleware works is we just call next, which will then essentially carry on, because it's kind of passed through this middleware successfully. And so it just carries on handling the request. And of course we need to export the authenticate token function. Okay, so we want to kind of see this in action now. So how do we do that? Well, if we go to users routes, at the moment anyone can get to see all the users, but perhaps we only want to let authenticated users see all the users. Actually, in reality, we probably just want to have it authenticated admin users see all the users, but let's keep things simple. So let's just double check that this allows everyone to see users at the moment. So if we go to request.rest and let's come down here and let's do a get, and let's just copy this because I'm a bit lazy. So that users, and let's do a send request, and as you can see, anyone can see all the users in our database at the moment. In fact, we've only got the one, which is Bob. Let's just add another one. So let's put in Fred here, say, and Fred, and a password of Fred, and let's just create another user here. So we've just added Fred, and then if we do a send request, there you go. So we've got 2 users here, and at the moment anyone can see all our users. Now we want to just only allow authenticated users to see our list of users. So how do we do that? Well, if we go to our users route here, and it's as simple as putting in our middleware by doing authenticate token here. And actually that auto imported for me, but if it doesn't, you have to import it up here. And now that's kind of inserted our middleware, and it won't get through our middleware unless we're authenticated. So let's save that, go back here, and now try again, and we get this error now, null token. So that's actually hitting this line here because we basically haven't sent across a token in our header. So it's hitting this line here. So how do we send a token across? Well, let's come back here, and what we need to do is we come down underneath here, and we can do authorization, bearer, and here we can stick in our token. Now we need a token that is valid, so we need to log in first, grab this access token here, copy, paste it in here, and then send the request. And now we were successfully authenticated, and it's sent back our users. But eventually our web token will expire because we set it to like 40 seconds. I think it was 40 seconds. Come in here. How long was our... Oh, 20 seconds. Yeah, I thought that was a quick 40 seconds. So yeah, it expired just after 20 seconds. So we get JWT expired because we hit this line here. We got an error because the token expired, and so that happened. And so it doesn't matter how many times we try and get authenticated, that's not going to work. And if we start messing around with this token, maybe try and delete a few characters or whatever, then it will actually fail for different reasons. And we need a completely valid token in here to get past the authentication stage. Okay, so now we need to just handle refreshing our token. So if we go into auth-routes, and underneath login, we want to do router.get refresh underscore token. Let's do an arrow function and a good old try catch. So this is where we are going to try and use our refresh token to get a new access token. And hopefully our refresh token is getting sent along in a cookie, in that HTTP only cookie. So we read it out of the cookie like so. And actually, for the moment, let's just console log out our refresh token to see if that works. So we'll have to jump back here so we can see our console. So if we come back into here, into request.rest, and we want to do a get. Let's copy that, but we want to do auth/refresh_token. And then if we do send request, as you can see, we are getting our refresh token out of our cookie like that. So that's good. So this is working. But let's check for it being null. And we'll return a status of 401 and JSON with an error of null refresh token, like so. But if all's good, we'll get to this line and we will want to verify our refresh token. Make sure it's been created using our refresh token secret. So verify refresh, in fact this should be refresh token, this should be refresh token like so. So verify refresh token against our refresh token secret. Now, as we know, this takes a callback. Like that. And if there was an error, we want to return with a status of 403, and we'll return some JSON so we can see the error message. Otherwise, we're all good. So we want to create our tokens again. So we want this to use our JWT tokens with our user payload. So, which is this, which we get out of the token, out of the refresh token. And again, we want a new refresh token that we can put in our cookie. So this has given us an access token and a refresh token, and so we can pull the refresh token out of tokens here, stick it in a cookie, and we are now good for however long this refresh token is good for. And of course, we want to do res.json tokens. So we want to return our tokens. And let's catch our error. It's going to be exactly the same as we're doing here. So let's just copy and paste that. And now we should be able to use our refresh token now to get a brand new access token and a new refresh token. So let's see if that works. So we can come back here now and do a send request. And it's saying that our JSON Web token has expired. So that's probably because we've been coding for 5 minutes. So let's just double check if I go into here. Yeah, I said for 5 minutes. So our refresh token has probably expired. So the first thing we want to do is we want to log in so that we get a access token and a refresh token. Let's see if we can quickly, maybe not fast enough, paste, send request. Yeah, just about quickly got in there, but within 20 seconds with our access token, but that's expired now. So we should be able though to use our refresh token to get a new refresh and access token. Let's do that. And there you go. This access token should be good for another 20 seconds. So let's just paste that in here. And there you go. Then that's going to eventually run out. And instead of expecting our user to log in again, which would be tedious, on the front end we can just use our refresh token to get a new access token. Now I guess the thing that might not be completely obvious is that we're not setting a cookie here. So this get request is kind of automatically sending the cookie across. And that's kind of exactly what happens. So, you know, if we look in here, we can see that cookie obviously does exist. And it's because it's getting set by the server here. Any subsequent request will automatically be sending across that cookie along with the request. So the last thing I want to show is how to log out, or essentially clear this refresh token. And so what we can do is do a router.delete refresh underscore token arrow function as per normal, try catch. And we simply want to clear our cookie. And it's as simple as that. So that will clear our refresh token cookie. And then we can just return the 200 saying refresh token deleted. Simple as that. Otherwise, Just going to do our standard error handling. And if you want to see that in action, we just come down here, do a delete, and that exact same route there. Refresh token deleted, there you go. So now you have enough of the API, I think, to have a handle on how to properly add users to a database, hashing their passwords so their passwords are secure, and then doing a login system that authenticates the user, checks their password, and then we have this whole JSON Web token thing going on, which basically gives a good user experience so they don't keep having to log in every time they come to your website or open a new tab or refresh the page. All those things can now be handled using refresh tokens. So I'm not going to go through the client code in any detail. What I'll do is I'll just paste in the client side files, and then I'll quickly go through how they're calling the API, and I think we'll leave it there then. Okay, so the HTML is fairly straightforward. If you remember what the web page looks like this. So we have a login section, users, refresh token section, and a delete token logout section. So login, users, refresh token, delete token. And I guess the most interesting one is the login form. And just the key here is that we've got this name, email, name, password, and we've got the submit button, and that enables us to grab that form using getElementById, and then we write a little arrow function to handle the onSubmit of that form. And because we've named the form inputs, we can do form.email and form password like that to get the values for the email input and the password input. So this is calling this login method and sending it email and password inside this data object here. So I'm using fetch, which is built into most browsers nowadays, and it's a good easy choice. The other choice is obviously Axios, but fetch works fine. And essentially this is reproducing what we're doing here. So a post request with a body that's got email and password in. So if we come back here, a post request with a body that's got email and password, because data's got email and password in. We just need to use JSON stringify to turn it into a JSON string, and that's about it for the login. The only other interesting thing is that, like I mentioned, access tokens can be easily read on the client side. So the payload inside them can be easily decoded, and so I'm making a point of including this JWT decode JavaScript here, which is just some basic JavaScript that actually just decodes our access token, which means that we can pull out the username, user ID, and email directly out of that decoded access token. If we go down a bit, fetch users. If you remember rightly, to fetch our users we actually need our access token, and so if we go down here we can see that we've just done this. Very, very simple. So we're using the authorization header and bearer space token, and that's enough to get our users as long as we have a valid access token. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is cookies and servers. So this is a relatively simple setup in that my API is being served up on the same server as my front end, and so the cookies are totally happy with that, and you shouldn't have any problems with your HTTP only setting to true, and your cookies should work fine. But if you're like me and kind of like to have your API separate from your front end, then your cookies are going to get a little bit fussier. So if I paste in what I mean, you're probably going to have to set same site to none, which then means that if you want them to be HTTP only, I think you need secure setting to true as well. So you may need all this for these cookies to be happy to go between your essentially your front end server and your API server. So just bear that in mind, but I will probably do an example deploy to Netlify with a backend of Heroku, so showing that it does work at the very least, and I'll probably do another deploy where it's all on Heroku. If there's any change, you know, if this is different, I will make a note of it somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that this should be enough to get it working with a front end on Netlify and a back end on Heroku. And I think that's about it for this video. All the source code is going to be in a GitHub repo, which I will put in the video description. Like I say, I will probably do a couple of deploys, one just purely on Heroku and one with sort of split Heroku and Netlify, and so you can test those out. And I haven't gone through absolutely everything, but there's not much more to it really, and hopefully there should be enough there for you to at least knock up a pretty simple login system. Let me know in the comments if you want a more detailed video on this. I could probably do a whole React app using this kind of system, so let me know if that would be helpful. Quite like to do it in Svelte or something like that, so that would be kind of cool as well, or maybe even Vue. So let me know if you'd like to see that, and yeah, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks very much for watching, and this is the time that I ask you if you could subscribe, please. That would be super useful. That would be really nice, because that would encourage me to do more videos like this. Thank you very much.